The worst programmer I know. This is a blog post that I've had on the queue for a while. I'm really excited to see what it's about. The great thing about measuring developer productivity is that you can quickly identify the bad programmers. I want to tell you about the worst programmer I know and why I fought to keep him on the team. And I did not expect that angle. I'm already fully invested. Oh boy. A few years ago, I wrote a Twitter/X thread about the best programmer I know, which I should write up as a blog post as well. Take a quick look at this thread because I am curious. Also, make sure we give this individual a follow. Apparently, they're only on Mastodon now, but regardless, appreciate it. What do I mean by the best programmer I know? He sees what is really there. I see what I am conditioned to see. Once he pointed out, it was obvious all along. He solves the problems at hand, not a fancy generalized version. He writes simple, obvious code that's easy to change later. He knows he doesn't know, but tries anyways. He then iterates on his attempts until he gets there. This requires humility and perseverance. He chooses the right tool for the job, even if he hasn't used the tool before. He figures the investment in learning the tool is worth it to solve the problems the right way. This means he builds simple solutions rather than easy ones. He knows when to hack and when to invest in quality and make these choices deliberately. His hacks are still written in a way that are easy to stabilize later. He builds small, intention-revealing components that can be easily refactored, restructured, or even replaced. He is generous with his knowledge and takes genuine delight in seeing people learn. He taught me that the learner should always drive in a pair. You feel like you're going slower, but you both get better faster. Note, the learner isn't always the less experienced person. There's so much genius bits in this point here. There's a lot of really, really good info there. Point 8 is that he doesn't constrain himself to software. He looks at the whole situation and will happily refactor a process, make physical hardware, build a supporting app, challenge the premise of the problem, whatever it takes. Just happens to usually involve software. Also a very good point. 9, he stays informed by plugging into various networks, both public and private, of individuals and groups that challenge and advise each other. Another important thing, surrounding yourself in an echo chamber is one of the most common failures I see anyone fall into, especially in the engineering world. It's easy to just surround yourself with people who agree with you, or more importantly, disagree with some bigger narrative that you don't like, and then you never actually learn about things. You just stay in that bubble. We see this for positives and for negatives. Point 10 is that this person's a net contributor to any group that they're a member of, not just through information, but through encouragement and support. He has the ability to just start. I'll procrastinate, read the tutorials, gen up, etc. He just goes from stoplight to stoplight until he's done. Note, he happens to be male. This is incidental. I know plenty of female programmers with these characteristics. Absolutely agree. And yeah, this is something I'm actually really proud of my ability with, where like when I'm starting, I start. I don't like spending all the time reading tutorials and going through docs and all those things. I just start writing. And the things where I can't do that tend to be the most frustrating to me. Like when I first tried Remix, I just dove in, and the code that it starts with its init makes no sense unless you know Remix really well. And everyone in the comments was, go read the 200-page getting started with Remix tutorials. Like, no, I just want to figure out the fucking thing. I love this. Point 12, he works really bloody hard at this. There's no innate programming gift. The way to make something look easy is to do it again and again and again and be prepared to be rubbish at new things until you get better at them. This is hard, especially if you have a big ego. Yeah. The only reason I'm not concerned about my ego is I'm good at this. I love failure. In fact, I miss failure when I'm doing things I'm too familiar with. So I'm constantly seeking out the ability to do things wrong so I can learn from it. 13, he doesn't follow any single method or methodology, but he learns about them in case they may be useful. And so he has context when other people talk about them. 14, related. He learns languages, tools, libraries, programming styles, which gives him different perspectives. That's something I need to work on more, specifically new languages. I've not left TypeScript anywhere near enough lately. Point 15 is that he has interests outside of programming, including physical activities like acrobatics and taking his family life seriously. This is a good example to less experienced programmers that they should keep a decent balance. This is an interesting one. I had another friend, creator, homie of the channel, recently mentioned that a lot of his like younger friends and his little brother and their friends really like me, not because my content's super valuable to them, but because I'm a popular programmer that's pretty senior and knows what he's doing, that also skateboards and does other things in their free time. And it's amazing how few examples there are of that, of people who are big in the code space that are also doing other things with their lives and not trying to hide those or avoid talking about them entirely. It's cool that that's called out as one of the highlights here. Point 16 is he sends people home at the end of the day. Also very valuable. 17, he has amazing attention to detail, but doesn't take himself too seriously. 18, he's as comfortable with designing awesome web pages as he is with designing awesome backend infra and awesome distributed architectures. He's got good at them by studying them. Point 19, he watches how people use his software, figures out what frustrates them, simplifies it, and eliminates their frustration. He doesn't make assumptions about what people want from his software. He asks them and he listens. Another really important, underrated point, especially in the developer world, we love to assign reasons for doing things. We love to tell them how to use things, not looking at how people end up using it and then adjusting accordingly. And then point 20, he studies the business domain he is working in and its inhabitants so he can express domain concepts clearly in code and connect them together to solve meaningful problems. Solid thread, but we're not here to talk about the best developer. We're here to talk about the worst one. So back to it. Oh, that's an interesting framing. Seems only fair to tell you about the worst one. His name is Tim McKinnon, and I want you to know how measurably unproductive he is. Is that not this author? Interesting. Interesting, he called out this individual by name. I thought it was going to be a meta thing. He was like calling himself out. But nope, he actually linked the LinkedIn of the worst programmer he knew. Imagine being poor Tim in this scenario. Let's figure out why Tim is the worst. We were working for a well-known software consultancy at a big bank that decided to introduce individual performance metrics, in quotes, for appraisal and personal development purposes. Oh boy. As soon as we're talking about measuring line counts, we're in hell. This was cascaded through the organization and landed in our team in terms of story points delivered. This was after some considered discussion from the department manager, who knew you shouldn't measure things like lines of code or bugs found, because people can easily game those. Oh boy. Our goal is to write bug-free software. I'll pay a $10 bonus for every bug you find and fix. Yeah. Once you're fixing bugs, you start making more bugs just to fix them. This is quality meme, even if we don't like Dilbert anymore. Ha. Instead, we would measure stories delivered, or it may have been story points. Turns out that doesn't matter. Interesting. Is this a whole article about the Slacker's Guide to Project Tracking or spending time on more important things? This is a PDF that's a research paper. Okay. If y'all want me to talk about the Slacker's Guide to Project Tracking and actually read through this white paper at some point, let me know, because I'm not doing that for this video. Anyways, they were measuring story points instead because they believed those represented business value. We were using something like Jira, and people would put their names against stories, which made it super easy to generate these productivity metrics. And this brings us to Tim. Tim's score was consistently 0. 0, not just low or trending downwards, literally 0. Week after week, iteration after iteration, 0 points for Tim. Well, Tim clearly had to go. This was the manager's conclusion, and he asked me to make the necessary arrangements to have Tim removed and replaced by somebody who actually delivered, stories. And I flatly refused. It wasn't even a hard decision for me. I just said no. You see, the reason Tim's productivity score was 0 was that he never signed up for any stories. Instead, he would spend his day pairing with different teammates. With less experienced developers, he would patiently let them drive whilst nudging them towards a solution. He would not crowd them or railroad them, but let them take their time to learn whilst carefully crafting moments of insight and learning, often as Socratic questions, what ifs, how else's. With seniors, it was more like co-creating or sparring, bringing different worldviews to bear on a problem to produce something better than either of us would have thought of on our own. Tim is a heck of a programmer, and you'll always learn something when you pair with him. Tim wasn't delivering software. Tim was delivering a team that was delivering software. The entire team became more effective, more productive, more aligned, more idiomatic, and more fun because Tim was in the team. I explained all of this to the manager and invited him to come by and observe us working from time to time. Whenever he popped by, he would see Tim sitting with someone different working on their thing. And you could be sure that the quality of that thing would be significantly better and the time to value significantly lower. Yes, you can have better and faster and cheaper. It just takes discipline. Then when Tim wasn't pairing with people. In the end, we kept Tim, and we quietly dropped the individual productivity metrics in favor of team accountability, where we tracked and celebrated the business impact we were delivering to the organization as a high-performing unit. This is a real big piece here. More and more companies I find are doing this, where they're not tracking developers' success individually. They're tracking a team, and the team can figure out how they want to do things themselves. Some teams choose to track based on story points. I know that because I was on one of the very few teams that did that at Twitch, and it was miserable for me because I was constantly floating, constantly helping plan things, constantly canceling tasks and getting things thrown out. So my numbers would go from I'd have a 40-point week when you're supposed to do about a point a day. And then I would have 0-point weeks for 3 weeks in a row as I was helping other people get their stuff done. Yeah, that team did not manage its points well. But on the team I was on before, points were just a way for the org to know roughly, is this thing moving along or not? And it worked well for that. But it's not a way to track individuals. Companies should track teams and teams should track individuals. And this article calls that out very well here. If you feel like the team is not delivering enough, tell the team they're not delivering enough, and they'll give you one of two things: a justification or things they need help with. Either way, that's when you get involved. You don't at a company level decide we're going to fire these people because they don't commit enough code. You ask the teams what resources they need and what problems they have, and let them make these decisions. And if you don't trust the leads of those teams to let you know who should and shouldn't be fired, then you should fire that team lead instead. Anyways, the TLDR is as follows. Measure productivity by all means. I'm all for accountability, ideally as a tangible business impact expressed in dollars saved, generated, or protected. This is usually hard, so proxy business metrics are fine too. I love this one. Specifically, I remember one of my earliest managers at Twitch was trying really hard to get some performance wins merged for one of the server ingests for Twitch. He saw a way to save a ton of money that Twitch wasn't interested in doing. This particular individual put his job on the line, which was insane. He was so confident both that it would work and save money that he offered to the company, which this would have worked in the early startup days of Twitch. It did not work at this point because it was an Amazon company. His proposal was, hey, how about I forgo my salary? I work on this full time. You don't pay me, at least not traditionally. Instead, I take 10% of the money that Twitch saves if they make this change. It'll be less money than I make right now, but by the end of the year, I'll be the richest person at the goddamn company if you let me make this change. And they still didn't do it, so he ended up quitting and going to work at Stripe. But yeah, I have been blown away at how people can notice these types of things. I've even heard stories from like Prime where he found ways to save potentially millions a year, but the company wasn't interested for any of a billion reasons. Always interesting to hear these stories and see these things play out. And I wouldn't believe those stories if I hadn't encountered one so early in my career at Twitch. But yeah, a lot of engineers know how to save a lot of money. And if you're trying to save money as a company, you should probably let them. In fact, if this particular individual is allowed to make those changes, it's possible Twitch wouldn't have had to lay off as many people now because of all the money they've spent on those inefficient services over the last, 8 years now since that moment? Yeah. 7 years. Regardless, insanity. As this article says, just don't try to measure individual contribution of a unit in a complex adaptive system because the premise of that question is flawed. Yes, totally agree. DORA metrics, for example, are about how the system of work works. Whether as Western culture indicates or a flow of technical changes in production, they measure the engine, not the contribution of individual pistons, because that makes no sense. Also, if you ever get the chance to work with Tim, you should do that. I agree. Sounds like Tim is pretty damn good at his job. I am curious what the Chewbacca defense he links here is. Yeah. It's when the criminal defense lawyer tries to confuse the jury rather than refute the case of the prosecutor. That makes sense. And it's referencing South Park. That's hilarious that like a common-ish term for a defense strategy is directly from South Park. And yeah, that does fit here. It's a metric that makes no sense so you can distract people. I will say though, now that I've read this, seems like Tom has some competition because this Tim dude, he knows what he's doing. That was a great article. Huge shout out to Dan North for writing that. Loved it. Until next time, peace nerds.